There we go. So good evening, everyone. If we can go ahead and get started. I'm Naomi Manuel, and I'm with the Epilepsy Foundation of Hawaii. I want to thank you all for joining us today for a talk on FDA-approved devices for epilepsy. I'd like to start off with our foundation's mission, and that's to lead the fight to overcome the challenges of living with epilepsy and to accelerate therapies to stop seizures, find cures, and save lives. We as an organization provide educational talks like this talk that you're here for today. We offer seizure first aid certification training, advocacy, referrals, and all kinds of support for individuals, caregivers, and the community impacted by seizures. If everyone doesn't know, November is National Epilepsy Awareness Month. Every month should be Epilepsy Awareness Month, right? But November in particular is when the epilepsy community comes together to leverage our community strength to raise awareness of epilepsy, of seizures, seizure safety, and to reduce the fear and challenges that many people with epilepsy may face. Our Hawaii Epilepsy Education Speaker Series is kind of a spin-off of our education conference that's usually held in person each November. But of course, like a lot of things, due to COVID, we've gone virtual with our educational talks, which has actually allowed us to safely reach a broader audience. Besides our speakers, I'd also like to thank our sponsors, VNS Therapy, LivaNova, Bayside, Greenwich Biosciences, Organics, SK Life Science, and Medtronic for supporting this Hawaii Epilepsy Awareness Month speaker series. Their support really assists us to get important and critical information and resources out to you and our epilepsy community here in Hawaii and beyond, of course. And with that said, we really want to thank our speakers today. We have here Jenna Young, a VNS therapeutic consultant with LivaNova, Julie Clifton, senior therapy consultant with NeuroPace, and Kevin Luckett, who is a representative for Deep Brain Stimulation on Medtronic. So our first speaker will be Jenna Young. Jenna is a VNS therapeutic consultant with LivaNova. So Jenna, if you're okay to go, I'm gonna stop my screen and then you should be able to pull up yours.
Hey, hello everyone. Okay, bear with me as I navigate through technology here. Right. Okay, can everyone see? Oh, I accidentally jumped ahead. Sorry about that. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we see your screen.
Yes.
So everyone knows we're going to have the three speakers. Jenna's going to go first, then Julie, and then Kevin. Okay?
Okay, so I am Jenna Young, and I am the VNS therapy rep for the state of Hawaii. I have been here about 3 years as working for VNS, and actually almost 4 years. So some of you may or may not have seen me in the clinics. But we'll just do an overview today, and at the end, there's some resources if you would like additional information. You could take like a photo of those websites if that's something that interests you. So we're going to go over the basics of drug-resistant epilepsy and an introduction of VNS. And at the end, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those out there. About drug-resistant epilepsy. So why this is important, because these are the patients that are candidates for neuromodulation devices like VNS. So you may or may not be aware that of the 3.4 million Americans that have active epilepsy, about 1 in 3 will fall into the category of drug resistant. And that means they've tried 2 adequately chosen anti-seizure medications or anti-epileptic drugs, and they're still having seizures. We know that unfortunately, despite the newer medications, when you look at the 3rd drug, you have less than a 10% chance of becoming seizure-free, and then it gets lower and lower once you hit the 4th drug and 5th drug and so on. So the drug-resistant population is where these other options do come into the equation. So what is VNS? So I have right here, this is just a little plastic shell of a generator. It is a medical implant. VNS stands for Vagus Nerve Stimulation. It's been FDA approved since 1997, so about 25 years. Our approval is for people as young as 4 years old, and it is an adjunctive treatment. So it's an add-on therapy. It's meant to be used with your seizure medications. There's over 125,000 people that have VNS, and I think now about 35,000 of those are children. And the goal of VNS is to prevent your seizures before they happen and then stop them if they do start. So it's not a cure for epilepsy, but it is added on to help improve quality of life. So is VNS therapy right for you? This is where your neurologist or your epileptologist come into play. Have you tried 2 medications? Have you been worked up to see if you're a receptive candidate? If you aren't, or it's not something you want to pursue, are you having bad side effects from the seizure medications? And you're worried about missing doses of your medication, having a hard time with compliance. And then that recovery period, the postictal period, if that's something that is negatively impacting your life, that's where VNS could come into play. So there are over 1,000 peer-reviewed studies on VNS therapy because it has been around for a very long time. Some of the benefits, as you'll see from this slide, ultimately we want fewer seizures and shorter seizures. Quality of life has been extensively studied in VNS therapy. Also, they've looked at healthcare costs, the trips to the emergency room, hospitalizations, seeing the trend and decrease on those, the reduction in the risk of SUDEP, less intense seizures, a better recovery, and the side effect profile is very different than the anti-seizure medications. And if you get VNS, it doesn't prevent you from trying other therapies in the future. So this shows a study that with a large population of patients, and could see here, one thing that's interesting about VNS is it is also FDA approved for treatment-resistant depression. So you can see there the mood changes. It can help. We have an increase in serotonin and norepinephrine from the VNS stimulation, and a lot of patients report an improvement in mood. That postictal period, like we talked about, alertness, memory, mood, all very important, big picture, not just number of seizures, but how is your overall quality of life? What can we add into your treatment plan to improve on that? So VNS in children, because like I mentioned before, we are FDA approved for ages 4 and older. This down here at the bottom kind of walks through 2 different pediatric studies. And so when they're saying fewer seizures, often a neurologist wants to see your frequency of seizures cut in half. So in this study, 63% of children had their seizures cut in half. As we went over at the beginning, trying more medications doesn't improve seizure freedom rates, unfortunately. There's other like comorbidities from having uncontrolled seizures, especially in children. There is that percentage that will not outgrow their seizures. And we also know from the 25 years of experience that patients are 3 times more likely to be seizure-free if treated within 5 years of the epilepsy onset. How does it work? This is a common question. So there's 3 ways that your VNS device works, and I should have mentioned before, but it's a pacemaker-like device. So if you know anyone who has a pacemaker for their heart, it's the same technology, but instead of stimulating your heart, it's stimulating a nerve on the left side of your neck, your vagus nerve. The standard mode, which is a mode that since its inception back when it was FDA approved, it's called the standard mode. So it's implanted in an outpatient procedure. It takes about an hour. It's under your left collarbone. Sometimes they'll go in through the armpit, kind of depends on the patient. And it's just under the skin. And this is what the programming system looks like in the neurologist's office. It'll be turned on. And that standard mode is on in the background, stimulating the nerve every few minutes. It cycles through. So there's no need, it's not like a medication where you have to remember to do something. It's on in that standard mode, which is important with the VNS therapy. The next mode, which is the newest technology, is the detect and respond. So what they learned is that about 83% of patients with seizures have a rapid heart rate around the seizure onset. The device listens to the rapid heart rate and it'll turn on for 30 seconds when it detects that jump in your rapid heart rate increase. So that's the detect and respond. And it's been around for about 5 years. And the last way it works, where's my magnet? Okay, I apologize. Oh, here it is. So each patient gets 2 magnets or as many as you need. And the magnet mode is if you have auras or you see someone having a seizure, you swipe the magnet across the generator under the skin and it turns on stronger for 60 seconds. So I know that this is very empowering for patients that do have the auras or caregivers or family members that there's something that they can do. They can get involved and try to help stop the seizure if it does occur or shorten it. And I think it is important to know that success looks different for a lot of people with VNS, whether it's fewer seizures, shorter seizures, maybe the magnet works really effectively for them. It's not a quick fix. It does take time for these settings in the clinic to be made. That's where your neurologist comes into play. And like I mentioned with a magnet, it can be used to deliver an extra dose of the stimulation. It can also be used to temporarily suspend the therapy. So you can hold the magnet on top of where the generator is and say you're singing in a choir and you don't want it to stimulate your nerve. That gives you some control over, and as soon as you move it away, it's back to its normal settings. So the latest technology, you are still able to get MRIs as long as certain conditions are met. Your device is turned off during the MRI and the radiologist and MRI tech, they know the conditions that are necessary. Customized control. So we can actually program the device now for daytime, nighttime. So you could have different settings if you have your seizures during one specific time of day. And you could have different settings, the other 23 hours or 22 hours. So I've seen that be real helpful for patients. And the scheduled programming. So in the past, once you had the surgical procedure and the device is off, typically 2 to 4 weeks later, it's turned on. And now we can set the device up to titrate on a schedule so that you aren't having to go into the clinic as frequently for those increases to get you to the setting that we would like to have. And that's helpful also for neighbor island patients. So the procedure, it's not brain surgery. It's about an hour to hour and a half long, and 2 incisions, 1 small incision kind of like in a skin fold in your neck. And that's where, as you'll see in the diagram, the lead is around your nerve. And then the generator goes in through the armpit or just under the collarbone. And you'll go home that same day. The battery typically lasts between 5 and 10 years. It depends on the settings that your neurologist or epileptologist programs your device to. So side effects, you heard me mention the magnet and suspending the therapy. So you might have wondered, why is she talking about turning it off? So the most common side effect is in the first year, and that is hoarseness. So about 30% of patients, because it's right by your vocal cord, will have hoarseness when it is stimulating. And say you were a public speaker or in a choir and you didn't want your voice to be hoarse while you were giving a presentation or singing, that's when you can use the magnet to suspend the stimulation. Shortness of breath, sore throat, and coughing, those are smaller percentages and they do get better with time. Infection is the most common side effect, and that's about 2%. So resources, because I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock and not go over my time. If you're interested in learning more, the website, vnstherapy.com, is a really great resource. There's patient videos there, whether it's family members or patients themselves talking about their experiences with VNS. And it can also help connect you to a nurse education specialist. They aren't here in Hawaii, but I work closely with them. I can also come into the clinics to support with education needs. And so, yeah, pretty much any questions you might have that weren't answered or aren't answered, I suggest going to the website and reaching out. And these additional resources, you'll find them on the website. The community chat webinars, those are live webinars twice a month, and those typically have a patient and a neurologist or an epileptologist talking about VNS therapy. And the webinars, if you're interested in the latest research, those are recorded. That's epilepsyunlocked.com. And again, vnstherapy.com. And that is all. I want to see if anyone had any questions.
Okay, Jenna, there's one in the chat that just came in. What if you're working out or in a situation where your heart rate increases? How does that affect the dose that detects the increase in heart rate?
Great question. Okay, so that threshold of heart rate increase is determined by your neurologist and how you are tolerating the stimulation. There are certainly things like exercise that can cause your heart rate to jump up rapidly. You're already getting hundreds of stimulations in a day. Most people don't even realize that in the background. And so those auto stimulations, they'll just replace your normally programmed stimulations. And if there is discomfort while working out, that's something that can be adjusted in the office. We can adjust the threshold for the heart rate to meet, but typically it's not a problem, and it's something that can be worked around with each person and based off their lifestyle and their habits. But yeah, the normal mode is going off in the background, and an auto stimulation is just an extra stimulation. So most people do not notice it. Hopefully that helped explain it.
That's a very good question. Anyone else have any questions? You can just type them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. I don't see anyone unmuting themselves. So I think it's pretty safe to move on, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I will stop sharing.
While she does that, I'll introduce our next speaker. That's Julie Clifton. Julie has been a senior therapy consultant at NeuroPace for the past 6 years, and she can further introduce herself too as she gets her screen up.
I can't multitask. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Here. Yes. Thank you, Naomi. My name is Julie Clifton, and she is correct. I am a therapy consultant for NeuroPace. I've been here for nearly 6 years now, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. So thank you guys for hosting us. I'm going to be talking today about NeuroPace and the RNS system for adults with drug-resistant focal epilepsy. So Jenna and I didn't coordinate our slides before we spoke, so a couple are a little similar, but like she said, there's a lot of people living with epilepsy in the United States, and a lot of them are actually drug resistant. And as Jenna also said, there's less than 5% chance that a third medication will control seizures after you've tried two. And one thing we talk a lot about are our comprehensive epilepsy centers, which are the places where you can see an epilepsy specialist and receive very specific care by people who only treat epilepsy. So only 1 in 5 patients with refractory epilepsy are actually being seen at a comprehensive epilepsy center. So if you haven't been to one yet, I highly recommend going. Obviously, the biggest epilepsy center on island is at Queens Medical Center, and their team is wonderful. So I'm sure you guys know about them, but if not, I highly recommend going there. Understanding the different types of epilepsy is important, especially for this device. So we have what are called focal seizures, and you guys probably know most of this. They used to be called partial onset seizures, but about 2/3 of drug-resistant patients have this type of seizure. It begins with an electrical discharge in one part of the brain. Now, while it starts in one area, it can actually spread to other parts of the brain. And then there are also generalized seizures. And this is about 1/3 of drug-resistant patients. And that begins with widespread electrical activity throughout the brain. There are many different treatment options for drug-resistant epilepsy. There are actually new medications coming on all the time. I think even part of this education week is a talk about new medications. But in addition to that, there is epilepsy surgery. So if the seizures start in a part of the brain that can safely be removed, then you may be a candidate for epilepsy surgery, commonly known as resection or laser ablation therapy. And then there's what we're talking about tonight, the neurostimulation devices. And specifically, I'm talking about the RNS system. And RNS is specific to focal epilepsy or partial onset seizures. How the RNS system works. So there are 3 things that it does. It's constantly monitoring your brain activity 24 hours a day. It's always in the background looking at your brain waves. And then if it sees something that looks like a seizure, looks like abnormal brain activity, then it will respond and stop seizures. And then it also records those abnormal events. So your physician can actually visually see the seizures that you are producing. So this is a nice slide. It kind of shows you in a graphical representation what happens. So like I said, this orange part is just normal brain activity. So you're just kind of going about your day. Nothing in your brain is really happening until it does. And that's the blue area. So it notices this blue unusual activity. And we try within a half a second to a second to stimulate that area of the brain. And you'll see in purple that sort of flat line is a stimulation. And then the brain waves go back to their normal pattern afterwards. And again, all of this is recorded so your physician can see what's happening. We like to say that NeuroPace is personalized to your unique seizure patterns or your fingerprint. So we're not just treating epilepsy, we're treating your specific seizures. And that's why we call it a seizure fingerprint, because everybody's seizures are different in some way. And your doctor will personalize the device by programming it to your own specific brain patterns. And over time, the device is adjusted and we help it kind of get smarter over time. And we fine tune it to pick it up quicker and to really treat things that look specifically like seizures. And the data that we capture enables your doctor to really personalize and optimize that therapy. And the nice thing is that you're actually a participant in that because every day we have you download to give your physician that information. So this slide is actually a little old. There's over 3,000 patients that have been treated so far. We're currently at pretty much every epilepsy center in the United States, where we haven't gone outside the United States yet, and the device is broadly covered by insurances. And speaking of results, so a lot of this information comes from a recent study called our real world study, which looked back at patients and in the real world and looked at how they did over time. And what they found was the seizure frequency reductions improve over time. So the first year, patients had a 67% median seizure reduction, and then excuse me, and then at 3 years, it was actually a median of 82% median seizure reduction, which is really meaningful for a lot of patients. That you know, if you had a certain amount per week, imagine cutting that by 82%. And the 35% of those patients actually had a 90% or greater seizure reduction at their last follow-up, which we're really proud of that. So patients are a good chunk of patients are nearing seizure freedom. And then in our post-approval study, which is the study that got us approved by the FDA in 2013, 39% of patients reported at least one period of 6 months or longer of seizure freedom. And patients report, similar to what Jenna showed with VNS, quality of life improvements in mood, physical health, cognitive function, mental health, seizure worry. So a lot of different things that, like I said before, really help make life more enjoyable, meaningful. The clinical trials show chronic side effects associated with that you may see with medications. Sorry, I'm fighting off a cold that my daughter in daycare keeps bringing back over and over. There are no chronic stimulation side effects. The infection rate is about 3.7% per neurostimulator procedure, which is very similar to all of the neurostimulation devices. And patients with RNS systems showed a lower SUDEP rate. Are you a candidate? So you may be if you're 18 years or older, you have tried 2 or more anti-seizure medications. So basically that's when we call patients refractory at that point. If you have focal or partial onset seizures, so they have to come from 1 or 2 areas of the brain, and you still have seizures that impact your quality of life. The RNS system is intended to be used in conjunction with medications. So some of our patients can lower their doses of medication or maybe have one removed, but it's not something that usually patients can come completely off medication. So it's an adjunctive therapy in that regard. It's reversible, so you don't have to remove any brain tissue, which is nice also. So it's not destructive in any way. Your epilepsy team will first conduct testing to identify where the seizures come from. And then the procedure itself, the neurostimulator fits into a small titanium tray. It actually is placed in the skull. It doesn't touch the brain, but there are tiny leads, wires, as you can see down here in this graphic, that are placed at the point in the brain where the seizure starts, so at the seizure focus or foci. Once placed, the neurostimulator is not visible to you or anyone else. So once the hair grows back, people have a hard time actually seeing that they actually had surgery. It's typically a 1 or 2 night hospital stay, and the battery is estimated to last about 8 years. The replacement procedures are pretty quick. They're outpatient procedures, so you're in and out within a couple hours. And the device is MRI compatible now. Living with the RNS system, so stimulation is usually enabled at the first or second office visit, but you shouldn't feel the device working. At home, you use a handheld wand attached to a remote monitor, so a laptop, and to collect the information. So once a day, patients will take the wand, hold it to their device, and download that into a computer, which once they transfer the information, your doctor will review your data and make changes. At first, your doctor may see you about once a month, but over time, it's every 3 months. And like I said before, you can have an MRI with this device. And I am going to try to show you guys, it's just a 5-minute, I went the wrong way here. I think I have to do it this way. I'm going to show you a 5-minute video that just shows some of our patients. I think a great way to have everybody really see what the device is about is to hear from actual patients. So someone let me know if you can't see this or hear this, but I'm going to hit play and we'll just listen for a few minutes.
My name is Connie.
I'm Ian Olson.
My name is Louisa Fields. I'm Susan Hogue, and I'm mom.
I'm Paul Hogue, and I'm the patient.
My name's Araceli Lopez, and my dad is Richard Lopez, and he has epilepsy.
And I've had epilepsy since I was 13, which makes it 29 years.
The first seizure I had was when I was 60. I mean, almost exactly when I turned 60. And I thought, what the heck is this? It was a feeling. It was a feeling of dread. You see your child go into a seizure and there's really nothing you can do except try to comfort them, try to cushion their head when they've fallen to the floor.
The fear of when one's going to come on. Am I going to be in danger? There's been times where I've been picked up off of the train tracks here in San Jose.
I could go, a day with multiple seizures in a day, and I wouldn't remember that day at all.
Well, everyone kind of looks at you different when they know you have it. If they don't know you have epilepsy, they can't tell.
When I was small, I didn't really know what epilepsy was, so when he used to have seizures, I knew it was bad, but I didn't really think much of it. But as I got older, I started realizing that, he was in pain and stuff.
Since age 11, it took 10 years to get a correct diagnosis.
Really, nothing was working. I went through about 9 medications, and he was maxed on 2 different meds and was just sleeping most of the day and night, so really didn't have a life.
Some of us are on so much medication that the pharmacists sometimes question, hey, why are we dispensing this much?
And I had heard about the NeuroPace probably a good year before that. We were like, gotta try it. We've done everything else.
I realized that this really is what we needed for our future and for our family. So February, he had the surgery.
First thought of brain surgery puts everyone into a panic. But I mean, in a couple days, I was up around with the kids.
This is something that like nothing else lets people see what's happening, when it's happening, how long it's happening, so that the device is trained to actually recognize the very onset of the seizure and send the electrical stimulation. So it's so quick that there's so many times when he has seizures, we don't even know that he's having them.
It's just a lot more relieving being able to see that doctors can see where it is, when it's happening, and do something about it.
I went at least 3 months without a seizure, which is the longest I had gone before, since I started having seizures at 11, and I'm 27 now. So in those 16 years, that's the longest that I've been without a seizure.
He doesn't have to take as much medication, and the seizure control is so much better with the RNS. He has much more clarity in thought. He was able to go to Cabrillo College in Aptos, which is a junior college. And so I'll just spend a lot more time doing the kinds of things I want to, instead of being hit with, oh man, I hope I don't have a seizure like that day.
I see an improvement in every single day, and I'm grateful that I don't have to witness those seizures as much anymore, because that was really difficult for me as his wife to see that.
I feel safer. I feel a lot more safer that my doctors can see what I'm describing to them.
I could do soccer, I can ski, I can do volleyball.
I'm all for looking for ways to improve my life. So I would recommend it to anyone else. We don't worry as much that my dad's gonna have a seizure.
The doctors looked at the data on it and said, hey, you had a seizure this day. What were you doing? I was at my desk plugging away.
All right. Let me try to get back to Zoom here. And that's the conclusion of the presentation on the RNS system. Does anybody have any questions? We'll still be here to the end, so if anything comes up, just let us know.
Okay. If anyone doesn't have any questions about the RNS or for Julie, we'll just move on to Kevin, and then they'll all be here at the end to answer any other questions that anyone has. And then again, feel free to use the chat, okay? Okay, and our final speaker is Kevin Marquette. Kevin started with Medtronic Neuromodulation Deep Brain Stimulation in May of 2013. After 23 years of being a neurological-based physical therapist, Kevin has been a practicing physical therapist in the rehabilitation field since 1989 and is co-owner with his wife Ginger of Ohana Pacific Rehab Services LLC in Honolulu. He is the primary author of a landmark medical text on rehabilitation, conditioning with physical disabilities. Kevin also authored a book for caregivers, Ultimate Caregiver Guide, as well as Move It, an exercise and mobility guide for people with Parkinson's disease. Kevin is also a past head coach for the United States Disabled Sports Team and was a member of the U.S. Olympic Committee and coached in international games, including the World Championships and the Paralympics in Barcelona, Spain in 1992. Very cool, Kevin. So it's all yours. I see that your screen is up. You ready to go?
Ready to go. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Aloha. Again, I'm Kevin. So I've been in Hawaii for 29 years, and I've been working with Medtronic Deep Brain Stimulation for 8.5 years now. So just a little bit before we get into epilepsy, just a little background about DBS. So Deep Brain Stimulation is not a new therapy. It's kind of like VNS. It's been around for quite a long time. Actually, we were FDA approved. It's been around in Europe way before US, but we were FDA approved in 1997, like VNS. And the original FDA approval was for essential tremors. And then in 2002, FDA approved for Parkinson's. And then in 2004, FDA approved for dystonia, 2009 for OCD, and then most recently in 2018, epilepsy. So we've been around for a while, but we're kind of late coming to the party as far as neuromodulation for epilepsy. So, we'll talk a little bit. I'm glad the other two speakers, thank you for both of them, are great. Thank you, Julie and Jenna. And so they kind of give you a foundation on neuromodulation, and where DBS fits in is kind of fills in the cracks where the other therapies, anyway, we'll go into that. So let me get started here. So I apologize, I have a lot of slides, but I'm going to bust through a lot of them, and I'll spend some more time on some other ones. So this is the FDA approval. So it's approved for bilateral anterior thalamic nucleus stimulation. For people who have, it's a subjective therapy. Let me move my thing here. So subjective therapy for reducing frequency of seizures for individuals 18 years of age and older diagnosed with epilepsy, characterized with partial onset seizures with or without secondary generalizations that are refractory to 3 or more medications. So very similar to the other neuromodulation options, in the sense that medications are not effectively controlling your seizures. So neuromodulation is an option. So this is a busy slide, and I kind of put it on here on purpose, but so basically where we fit in is, so as far as, when medications don't work, there's options for surgeries. If surgeries are not an option because of the location or risk, then neuromodulation is an option. If it is more generalized, then, as Jenna spoke, VNS is an option. If it's very focal, they can identify one or two areas of the brain, then RNS is an option. Where DBS falls in is the cases where it's maybe partial onset, so one or two areas, but with some generalization, and has not, so they're not maybe potentially because of generalization, not a candidate for RNS, but are a candidate for VNS, but maybe have VNS did not work for that particular patient, and they are not a surgical candidate. That's kind of where DBS falls in this slide. So, we basically, there's 30% of roughly the population that are not surgical candidates. VNS didn't work for the particular patient, and they were not, in particular, an RNS candidate because there was more generalization. So, DBS is similar to RNS in the sense that it does involve an implantation in the brain of leads. Where we differ from RNS is that RNS can identify certain areas where we actually, we implanted in a particular area in the thalamus. And so instead of being an area where the seizure originates, we kind of affect the transformer station. So the area in the thalamus is where there's input and outputs for seizure activity, and that's where we impact reducing the seizures. So different than RNS that can identify areas, one or two very specific areas. We can instead of those areas, we can impact it at the kind of the transfer station. So the FDA approval for DBS came off the Santee studies. So basically it was a long 7-year study. So the interesting thing, and the reason I put this slide up is this is kind of a tell on the population that is probably the most appropriate for DBS. So again, it is for adults, so we're not approved for anyone under 18. So the mean age of the studies was 36, half female, half male. Years of epilepsy was 22 years. And most of the people were on actually multiple meds, so, way more than two. Oops, let me move this down. Previous VNS, so 45% of the people had VNS, previous epilepsy surgery, 25% had surgery and didn't work. So this is kind of a tell of the population that may be appropriate for this therapy. The results of the therapy, very similar to the other therapies, RNS and VNS that you heard earlier today, is that over the 7 years, the longer the stimulation, the better the impact. So after year one, there was roughly a 40% decrease, and it gradually through the 7-year study, it was down to 75% decrease in seizure activity. So at the end of the 7 years, it showed 75% reduction. It showed a reduction in the most severe seizures, and then the satisfaction with the therapy after 7 years was 84%. This is another interesting slide, again, to show you that it didn't matter if they had, in this slide, so seizure onset, temporal lobe, frontal lobe, other. So again, we impacted all those areas, but we didn't impact them in that specific area. We impacted it by blocking or controlling signals at basically like a transformer station in the thalamus. If you look at people who had VNS and didn't have VNS, or had prior surgery, didn't have prior surgery, all had similar outcomes of showing gradual over the 7 years a decrease in tremors to closely 70%. As far as seizure freedom, 18% seizure free for at least 6 months, 8% for at least 2 years, and then 9% seizure free for 6 months prior to the 7-year. Similar to RNS and VNS, it is an adjunctive therapy, so you're still being managed with some level of medications. Also, like RNS, it is reversible, so it's not an ablative procedure. It uses electricity again to kind of basically restore balance in the circuitry of the brain, but it doesn't destroy brain tissue. Safety summary here. No unanticipated adverse effects, during the SANTE studies, the 7-year study. Depression memory, self-reported more frequently, a little bit in the active group. No significant cognitive changes or worsening of depression scores were observed over the 7 years. Seizures may occur upon initiation of stimulation, but can be controlled with programming. No symptomatic hemorrhages, and the rate was the same as a similar population for SUDA. And procedural and hardware risk consistent with other DBS therapies. So similar to probably the most frequent adverse event that can happen. It's very similar to with all any kind of implant device or any surgery is infection. And the infection rate is consistent, which is around what Julie presented. I think 3.7% is basically 3 to 5% is the national average for that for DBS implantable devices as well. Just kind of give you an overview. So it is, Jenna mentioned it's like a pacemaker. Actually Medtronic, the founder of Medtronic invented a cardiac pacemaker. And so this is like a pacemaker as well, but it's a pacemaker for the brain instead of a pacemaker for the heart. The components are, there's 2 leads. One goes to each hemisphere of the brain. There's an extension that goes behind your ear, and then it plugs into a battery that's usually placed underneath the clavicle. And it can also be replaced in the abdomen, but typically it's like usually under the clavicle. It is all under the skin, and similar to what Julie said, is when their hair grows back, you really can't tell whether you have the device or not. So when we were FDA approved in 2018, after that, there was some significant improvements or advancements in the DBS technology through Medtronic that allowed some new technology that is being applied actually to all the areas of treatment, including epilepsy and Parkinson's, in regards to brain sensing. So the technology now, the system that we have prior to the new technology, we weren't able to get information of what was happening in the brain at the time. So the neurologist would set the settings, and it would control whatever symptoms, whether it was Parkinson's symptoms or epilepsy and seizures, and it would be kind of a constant, like open loop system. So now the new technology we have is brain sensing. So we're actually be able to see what's going on in the brain, similar to RNS. We are not a closed loop system yet. So right now what happens is with the new brain sense technology is the neurologist can take that information and manually make adjustments, but it's not done automatically through the device at this point in time. But that is a closed loop system is the future for DBS, and not just for epilepsy, but for all the indications. We are, let me go back here. We are MRI compatible. So the whole system, both 1.5 and 3 Tesla. So when you look in Hawaii, 90% of the scanners in Hawaii are compatible with our device. Longevity for the battery, it really depends upon the settings. So probably very similar to the other neuromodulation devices. I would say on average, it's 3 to 6 years. Again, the settings will dictate the longevity of the battery. The software is upgradable, so that's as right now we're going through a study for the closed loop system. So once we get FDA approval for upgrades, then it doesn't require a surgery. It can be done remotely in the neurology office to upgrade the software of the battery itself. So basically, the battery is kind of a mini computer. So very similar. You will have a patient programmer. There are abilities for you to be active in the process of collecting data, with the neurologist, in regards to auras or actual seizures, where you can use your patient programmer and kind of timestamp that event, and they can use that information to look at the data and make adjustments to your stimulation. And this is just a shot of what the patient programmer would look like. So you can check your battery level, you can turn it on and off, and you can register events that happen. So I'm going to kind of skip over a lot of this, but this is this is the initial steps. Brain System, we're collecting data to help the neurologists better optimize the therapy and personalize it for you. The next step of this and what they're studying now is adaptive stimulation, where the device itself will take that information and make changes on the fly. At this point in the technology, the changes are made manually, but we have the information to understand what is going on and make those changes. So we are MRI compatible. Here's a better picture of the device itself. I will say that the procedures here in Hawaii are done right now at Queens and Kaiser. They're the two centers that are DBS centers here in Hawaii. Both centers are very experienced with DBS because they've been doing it actually for over 20 years. The procedure, it is it's an inpatient procedure. So the procedure takes, on average for epilepsy, probably 2.5 hours from start to finish, and then you stay overnight and go home the next day. That's MRI. As far as safety, very similar to, again, any implantable device. So I did bust through that pretty fast. I am open for questions if there's any questions.
Yeah, I don't see anything in the chat box for you, Kevin. Anyone else or anyone have any questions, please? You can unmute yourself or type it in the chat. I don't see any movement, but I do want to ask our three speakers, because there were a few people who joined us a little late, if you wouldn't mind doing a little 30-second to 1-minute overview of your product or your device, if you're willing and able to do that. I didn't ask you guys to do this ahead of time. I just thought it would be a good idea today to be able to do that for those that joined in late. And I know that there's a lot of good information in all the slides that you presented, but if you were to do like a 30-second pitch or 1 minute, 30 seconds to 1 minute on your device, like what are the ages, what is the process, the life of the device, and just that critical important information. I think that would be nice for our audience. So if you're okay, Jenna, going first.
Hi again.
Okay.
Can I also just say how nice it is to see faces? I'm so used to our mask life, guys. Anyways, okay, Jenna Young here with VNS Therapy. So Vagus Nerve Stimulation for ages 4 and older. that are refractory to medications, focal onset, also known as partial seizures, with or without secondary generalization. This is what the implant looks like. It is an outpatient procedure, and I think I mentioned before, ages 4 and older. The lead is in the neck around the vagus nerve, and the pulse generator is under your collarbone, under the skin. And I think that's my 30-minute summary. Thank you, guys.
Hi, this is Julie again, and NeuroPace is the company that has the RNS system, so Responsive Neurostimulation. Basically, the device is indicated for patients who are 18 and over who are refractory to 2 or more medications. And we specifically treat patients with focal or partial onset seizures. So we have to be able to identify 1 or 2 areas of the brain where the seizures are starting. The leads of the device go directly into those areas of the brain where the seizures start. It's constantly monitoring the brain waves to see what's happening. If it notices something that looks abnormal, like a seizure, it will stimulate hopefully within a half a second to a second. And the device itself is implanted into the skull. And I think one of the biggest things for us is really just to say, if you are refractory to medications and so basically if you're still having seizures and you've been on several medications, one of the best things you can do is go to an epilepsy center on island and have them evaluate you for get evaluated by one of the specialists there, so they can see what the next steps for you would be. NeuroPace is implanted at epilepsy centers specifically. And so if you think you may be a candidate, the clinicians at those centers would be able to really evaluate where your seizures are coming from and let you know if you are indeed a candidate.
Okay, I guess my turn. Thank you, guys. Again, I'm Kevin. I represent Medtronic Deep Brain Stimulation, which is another option for neuromodulation. As I mentioned in my talk, so we are not a new therapy. We've been around since 1997, but epilepsy is a new indication. Since 2018 was FDA approved. Similar partial onset with or without generalization, 18 years or older. Our therapy, typically the population in the studies that showed FDA approval and efficacy of over 7 years of roughly a 75% reduction in seizures, kind of fills in the crack where where RNS there's too much generalization for RNS, and possibly surgery and VNS did not work for a particular patient. That was a population that was looked in the study where we showed a significant improvement. So I think all 3 options are, again, for people that are refractory to medications, are something to consider. And Hawaii, actually, all 3 of those are offered on the island. So definitely good for everyone to be aware of what your options are. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I didn't say that in my introduction, and I really appreciate the ability to be with you guys tonight. And I really appreciate Julie and Jenna as well. Thank you for the great information. Aloha.
Yeah, for sure. I really want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to spend the hour plus with us today and just share the information on this other treatment for epilepsy. I typed in the chat if Jenna and Kevin, if you wouldn't mind putting your contact information in the chat, if anyone wanted to get a hold of you or had more questions about either the VNS, RNS, or DBS systems, how do they, what would be the best way to get in contact with you to get that information? So I see Julie put her information in there and Jenna as well. Kevin's getting in there right now. If there's any further questions, please put them in there. We have the experts here and they're willing to answer. So I I see a question. It's a direct question to me.
Yeah, I'm kind of confused on with the partial seizure, with what Julie and Jenna explained. So would it just be determined by the neurologist that selects which type?
Which type of seizures that you have?
Yeah, with like partial seizures.
Yeah, usually your neurologist, or maybe more specifically your epileptologist, if you're seen at an epilepsy center, would be able to do some testing and let you know what kind of seizures you're experiencing. And from there, they would probably give you options based on that testing.
Okay.
And I think Naomi, did Dr. Victoria Wong give a presentation yesterday on what it's like at an level 4 epilepsy center? You probably recorded that. That might be helpful to watch.
Yep, definitely. I did record. It is recorded. It hasn't been uploaded yet to our YouTube channel, but I will. We will have that up within at least a week or two, just to make sure that it's all cut and good to go. So that information will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. Any other questions? It's about 6:05. I'm also gonna put in the chat the link to the rest of the talks that are happening this month. Right. Oops, that was a direct message. Sorry, I was responding to another one. But I'm putting it right here.
And Naomi, I saw one that asked if RNS and VNS can be used together, and they actually can. We have quite a few patients that have both. One or the other wasn't working to the full extent that the patient wanted, so the other device was put in. And some researchers are actually looking at the synergies between the two devices, how patients are doing that actually have both. And I even think some patients have RNS and DBS together as well. I don't know about your two devices, but I know for RNS you can.
That's a good question. I missed that one. And all of your devices are meant to be taken with seizure medications as well, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Let's see another message coming. Info. I do usually have a question about neighbor island patients, and accessing this information or getting the device installed. I know Julie said, and Kevin too, it can only be done in comprehensive epilepsy centers. Jenna, you want to maybe respond to that?
So VNS is a little bit different in that it can also be implanted in community hospitals. There's 3 different types of surgeons that typically implant VNS. You have neurosurgeons, vascular, general surgeons, and ENTs. It's about a 60 to 90 minute procedure, and you do go home that same day. And I do see one other question. My mother is 69. Can she still benefit? Yes, I know for VNS, and I think Julie's video even had a patient she was talking about her experience, and she was in her 60s, but our VNS patients in their 60s and 70s as well. And Kevin?
So for epilepsy, it tend to be a younger population, but yes, I mean, we have, in general for DBS, we've implanted people in their 80s with Parkinson's and other conditions. So yeah, as long as they are healthy, and cleared for surgery and appropriate, then there's no age restriction for us. Yeah.
And I see another question that came in as well. I know we're only speaking to epilepsy here, but can any of the devices help with other medical problems like sleep apnea, something like that? I know, Kevin, your device does.
So that is an off-label question. um,
Yeah,
no, so we're indicated, yeah. So the targets for we have multiple indications, right? So we have like 5 indications, but the targets are specific to those indications. And so, yeah, we kind of, that's, yeah. So I really can't speak to sleep apnea. That's not one of our indications.
still a great question. Anything else? Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording.